He's over by the outside line, and then he comes over, like he moves over. Like.
Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to walk you through how to use the estimate power values function within Golden Cheetah. It's a cool little calculator within the program that if you give it a whole bunch of different data points, it can generate power meter data that's pretty good. Now while it isn't as great as a power meter, so you can't use it for finite data analysis, you can use it for fleshing out a PMC or a performance management chart. That's great if you want to train with power or really manage your training stress. Or for instance, if you own a power meter and it's only on your main bike but not on your mountain bike, your cross bike, or your secondary bike, and you want to ride those bikes without having a gap in your training stress data, this is a good way to fill in that gap. Anyways, let's begin. So once we get to Golden Cheetah, we want to select the ride that we want to generate that power data for. So as you can see here, I have heart rate zones recorded and there's some heart rate data there. But let's just go under the ride here and you can see I have heart rate data, I have speed data, I have cadence, I have altitude, slope, temperature, but there is no power data here because the bike that I rode doesn't have a power meter. But we're going to use the calculator to generate that data. It's going to be pretty close. So you want to start here, again at your main screen, with the ride that has no power data selected. And one of the most important data points that we need and needs to be accurate is our rider weight. And now, I'm not the kind of person who keeps that updated within my rider profile. And what I needed to do was get my weight before the ride. So I went and weighed myself and found out that I was 65.09 kilograms. So I'm going to enter that under the data field under workout, 69.09, hit enter, and save that information on the ride. The calculator needs that, and it needs to be current to get some of the best data possible. Weight is one of the main factors that it uses in this calculation. The next weight that we need to know is the weight of our bike. You can acquire that information any way you like, whether you have a luggage scale, a proper park bike scale, or if you're stepping on the scale with your bike and separating the difference. We want that weight in kilograms. Now there's some debate on whether or not we should include the weight of water and fuel. I don't add that into my calculation. I'll weigh the bike and anything I strap to it. So for instance, I won't weigh the water bottle, but I will weigh my saddlebag before the ride. I want to know that weight because that weight is important. And if I put fenders on the bike, like on my fall bike, I want that weight as well. So I went and weighed my bike and I know that it's 11.11 kilograms. And that's going to factor in when we actually start doing the calculation. So to open the calculator, we want to go to the Edit drop-down and bring up the Estimate Power Values function. So select that. It's going to open a brand new window. Alright, so now that we've opened up that window, the Estimate Power Values window, you can see here that we have 4 fields. The first being bike weight in kilograms, CRR or coefficient of rolling resistance, wind in kilometers per hour, and heading, which is the direction that the wind is predominantly traveling in. So we need to start filling these fields with data that's as accurate as possible in order to get a pretty good estimate of what our actual effort was through the ride. So let's begin here. As I mentioned, my bike weighs today 11.11 kilograms. Now we want to enter that information and not hit enter. If you hit enter, it's going to start the calculation. Just enter it and leave it. You want to click on the next field over. Now we're in the CRR, or again, as I mentioned, coefficient of rolling resistance. The coefficient of rolling resistance is the amount of friction generated between the tire and the road surface. Now this varies between tires. Good quality tires have less rolling resistance. Poor quality tires have more rolling resistance. This factor doesn't really bear too heavily on our final calculation. Again, we want this to be as close as possible, but if we're off by a little bit, it's not really going to affect the quality of the overall data that the calculator generates. This can be pretty obscure information to obtain, there aren't many tire manufacturers that publish this. We have to go online to find this. And a really good resource for that is Cycling Power Lab. And under Cycling Power Lab, you can see here that there is actually a whole list of tires that are here. It's pretty extensive. If you're lucky, you're going to find your tire here. These are pretty high quality tires. I'm not so lucky. So we want to go over here. If you don't find your tire here, just go over to, in bold, typical premium clincher, typical with a butyl tube, typical premium clincher with a latex tube, typical premium tubular, or if you're like me on the bottom, typical training clincher with a butyl tube. So I'm going to take that information and I'm going to paste it into the field. There we go, 0.005. If you think that your tire has less rolling resistance, you can reduce it. If you think it has more, you can increase it. Again, the closer the number is to 0, the less rolling resistance it's going to have. I was running at about 100 psi on these 23mm tires. I think that's pretty good. If I think it's a little bit more, I'm going to be generous. Let's say 0.006. They're really cheap tires and they're really cheap heavy inner tubes. So 0.006 is the value that I'm going to give it. The next field here is wind in kilometers per hour. Remember, kilometers per hour, not miles. I would say that wind is the factor that is the data point that is weighed most heavily by the calculator, next to weight. Again, if you know anything about the forces that act on a rider, 80% is the air around you and the wind. So we want to have as accurate a number within this field as possible to get a good calculation from the calculator. Now, for me, a good resource is the website Weather Underground, because a lot of people who own personal weather stations will put their live feed from that weather station onto the website, and you can use that information to get a pretty good, or I would say the most accurate recording of the wind from your ride. You want to find one that's pretty close within the vicinity of where you rode and use that information. Let me bring that up here. My ride started at 2:30 in the afternoon. So I want to go here and I want to find that wind data from roughly from say 2:30 onward. And we can see here the wind speed was approximately, within that time I rode for about an hour or so. You kind of want a good number within the middle. So it was peaking at around 10.8 kilometers, coming down to about 4. So I would say that kind of the number right in the middle was 7 kilometers per hour. So I'm going to use 7 kilometers per hour for the wind speed within the calculator. So let's enter it. 7 kilometers per hour. Again, do not hit enter. If you hit enter, it's going to start the calculation. You just want to go and click onto the next field. That is very important. You don't want to hit enter. Just enter the number and click onto the next field. Hit tab if need be. Okay, so let's go back into Weather Underground here. And we're back in Weather Underground. The next thing that we need to know is the heading, or the direction rather, of where the wind was coming from predominantly during the ride. This part really trips people up because you need to enter it in a really strange way. I'm going to walk you through that in a little bit. But first we want to figure out which way was the wind actually heading for the most part during the ride. So let's go back to 2:30 here. And we can see here the wind direction is beneath it, right along here. And the wind was constantly changing during this ride. So we can see here that it's going from southeast to the southwest. The wind was just all over the place. Let's just take a number we can sort of see here these little dots, where most of these dots are populated. And we can see here that I really don't know. I'm going to take a stab at this one. So let's say, yeah, right there, and let's just go right in the middle. 180 degrees from the south. We'll use that figure. Again, the wind is all over the place, and it will be all over the place. Especially if you're doing a much longer ride, you aren't going to get this field accurate. Again, we're estimating here. We aren't generating great power meter data for finite analysis. We're just taking a good stab at it. So we'll say 180 degrees from the south. Okay. Now, let's go back to our field here. This is the part that really trips people up. From the north to the south, it makes sense. We have 0 at the top being north and 180 on the bottom. For north, east, and south, we have numbers that are 0 to 180. That makes sense. But we have a 360-degree circle that we're conceiving of to get those directions, north, south, east, west. The program doesn't allow you to do that. 0 makes sense being at the top, north. 180 makes sense being at the bottom. 90 makes sense, but negative 90 from if the wind is coming from the west, that really trips up a lot of people. So to help us with that, we want to get a graphic of an aviation compass. So here's our graphic of our aviation compass. And we're headed this way here. If you can see, south is 180. The number that we want is right here, between 180 and 190. But again, we can't enter 185. So we need to enter that using the numbers kind of on the inside of this dial. Anything on the west, southwest, or the northwest, we want to use these little numbers here. So we can see here that we want to enter -5 as our number. So that's the number we're going to use, -5. Let's go back to the calculator here. We're going to enter -5. Okay, so we have all 4 fields completed. We have our bike weight, coefficient of rolling resistance, our best guess at wind speed, and again, our best guess, we're in the ballpark here, of the direction that it was heading in. Now we're going to hit OK and start the calculation. We're back here now. We're back at our ride summary, and we can see here, look, we have power zones. Not only do we have power zones, we also have information here on different intervals. Again, using the auto interval function, it has created intervals. But let's look at the ride in a little more detail here. So I would say, looking at knowing the ride that I typically do here, this is pretty good. I ride this route on a regular basis, and I'd say we're actually pretty good on these numbers. A good place to look within the program to see if the ride matches up to the way you perceive the power regen in the ride is within the critical power curve. So we're going to select that here. Okay, so it's brought up the critical power curve. And I'm looking at this here, and yeah, it is actually, I'm seeing a bit of irregularity here. It's really brought that up. I know for a fact that I wasn't putting out that much power. So we need to fix this data. We need to clean it up a little bit and move it down. For whatever reason, at some spot in the ride here, we can try to find it, but not that enterprising. It's overestimated in this one spot. Everything else looks pretty good. So to correct that, we need to go to another window here, adjust power values. So to bring up the Adjust Power Values window, we want to go to Edit and Adjust Power Values. And it is going to bring up this new little window here. Settings, Adjust Power Values. And what we want to do at this point is make a reduction in the power. So typically I find that 5% adjustments will get you pretty close. So let's go -5. We want to bring that power down. So -5. And we'll see how that goes. Well, let's go a little bit more. Let's do another 5%. Again, we're only making a guess here. Okay, -15 seemed to do it. Probably at some point in that ride, the wind was behind me and giving me a good tailwind, which caused that overestimation. But I'm looking at this data here, and now that I brought it down by 25%, so it overestimated by 25%, this looks pretty good when I think back to the ride that I actually did. So to illustrate how close this calculator can get, I'm going to show you the same, roughly the same ride recorded with a power meter and using the estimate power values function. So this ride here that we're looking at is the ride that we just did the calculation on. And again, the aim of this ride was to just go out and ride. I had nothing really planned when I went out there. I just went out and rode. Now this other ride here on the same route from a similar day again with the same amount of effort, this is recorded with the power meter. It is pretty damn close if you ask me. I think I sprint on 2 different spots on the same route every time, just for safety reasons. So let's kind of compare the two here. So this is towards the end of my ride. This one spot's it's a good little stretch on a busy road. I just want to get the hell out of there. At that point, I hit about 600 watts, and that's with the power tap recorded ride. Let's look at the other ride here. It came a little bit later because I did a couple of recovery loops on a slower spot, and it estimated that effort was 571 watts. Again, that's pretty damn close. We're looking at 2 efforts in the same spot, 2 different days, 2 different levels of fatigue. That is pretty damned close. Again, that other little sprint with the estimated power, 376 watts. Again, my cleat was slipping. This was kind of a half-hearted sprint. And looking at the power tap recorded ride, that same sprint was, if I can find it here, yeah. I'm assuming that's the one there. Yeah, about 450 watts approximately. Again, I wasn't going too hard, had a good bit of fatigue. I just did a cross race the night before, looking at my training log. Yeah, I didn't have it in my legs, just like the virtual ride. That's pretty damned close. And if we look at the general layout of these peaks and valleys on the training data with the actual power tap ride compared to the virtual ride on the same course again, that's pretty damn close. Let's call up the power curve. Again, this is the one that we lowered by 25%. And now let's call up the power tap ride on the same. Yeah, that is almost identical. Again, virtual ride here. Look at the line. And bring up the power tap ride. Pretty darn close. Again, the higher peaks towards the higher peaks towards the shorter power ranges are a little bit higher, but everything else in general is pretty darn close. I would be satisfied having that information on this virtual ride within the grand scheme of my power log. So if I went and recorded this ride without power and just left it, it's going to deduct from my chronic training load. At this point in the season, I really don't care, but earlier in the season, where I'm still racing, I don't want that gap in my training data. Now, what this has done here has recorded a training stress score of 63. Again, I would say that this is pretty close to the effort that I actually did. I really wasn't trying. I was just going out there for a ride. So, had I left that, my chronic training load would have dropped by a point or two. Having entered this ride, I have that data there. My PMC doesn't have a gap. I can keep monitoring my training load. I want to bring your attention to I consider a major failing within the calculation, and that's how it estimates power on a climb. While the calculation does take elevation into account when it's making its calculation, it underestimates the power that you put out on climbs by a lot, and I mean a lot. So if we look at this ride here, Golden Cheetah found a climb that was significant enough to auto mark it. And if you look at this here, this climb is a bit of a drag. It goes on for just over 2.5 kilometers, and I was averaging 21 kilometers per hour on it. I wasn't going hard, but I was going enough. And Golden Cheetah's calculator estimates that I was doing 120 watts on that climb. 120 watts is a recovery ride. I know I was doing more than 120 watts. On the low end, I might have been doing 190, but I was kind of giving it at points. I'd say my average power would have been at least 200 watts. Nowhere near 120 watts. That is a huge underestimation. But again, that is a limitation. When we look at the big picture of the ride, it's pretty good. And again, we're not doing analysis on this. We're not looking for our 5-minute power on a particular ride or in the big picture of a ride. We're just filling out stress with this calculation. So bear that in mind. I'm going to walk you through that process once again, however a lot quicker, and using a ride recorded earlier in the day on a single loop. So I'm hoping that the wind information is going to be a lot more accurate. Okay, so we're back in the estimate power values window, and we're going to enter in the bike weight. We're going to re-enter the coefficient of rolling resistance, and now we're going to go and pull up some new wind data off of the website. So here we are, and that ride started around 1:15 in the day, and we can see here it was about a 45-minute ride, and the wind was, I would say, kind of in that ballpark of about, again, we'll say 7 kilometers an hour once again, and it was predominantly coming from 114, say 214 or so degrees. So we'll say, yeah, 214 on we'll say 200 degrees south-southwest. So let's enter that information. So 200 degrees south-southwest, we're going to know that is -20 going by our aviation compass. So 7 kilometers per hour, heading -20 degrees. And at this point, we hit OK. So here we are, and again, we have power meter data. We have power data rather, and this ride seems to be pretty good. It's a pretty hilly ride. These little peaks and valleys here. Calling up the CP curve. And we're looking at it here. I'd say that that is pretty good. So this ride here is just a little closed loop, bit of a short climb every single time you go around. So let's select one of these matches and see where it lines up. And as you can see here, we get a match every time, more or less every time the climb starts. And that makes sense. Once again, that is how to use the estimate power values function within Golden Cheetah. If you found this video helpful, hit the like button. If you go out and use the function and are satisfied with the data as I think you're going to be, come back, hit the subscribe button.